I think we're in an IT affordability crisis right now. How does the organization adapt to all these tools out there? Which one do I buy? How much can I afford?
Welcome to the Optimize podcast, brought to you by VisibleThread. The Optimize podcast is your go-to source for expert insights on BD, capture, proposal management, and government contracting. Each series is hosted by an expert in the field, bringing their unique experience and strategies to every episode. We're excited to have Marcia Watson as our host for this series. Marcia is a proposals operations expert who has led teams to grow contract wins from $600 million to over $2 billion. With years of experience, Marcia and her guests are here to help you navigate the complexities of all things GovCon. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on wherever you are listening. Now let's join Marcia on this episode.
Hi, and welcome to VisibleThread's Optimize podcast. I'm Marcia Watson, your host for this season. Really looking forward to this episode. It's titled Work in Progress, literally, Innovate, Adapt, and Evolve. The rapid evolution of work culture, driven by the pandemic and technological advances, is reshaping industries and necessitating a fundamental shift in business strategies, leadership styles, and employee expectations. The once familiar office landscape is now a mosaic of remote, hybrid, and in-office models. As we navigate this uncharted territory, technology is both a catalyst and a challenge. AI, cloud-based tools, and virtual communication have redefined efficiency, but also introduced complexities like cybersecurity risks. This podcast dives deep into these transformations, exploring how industries are evolving in response to the post-COVID era. We'll examine the impact of generational shifts as boomers retire and younger generations bring fresh perspectives. We'll also dissect the challenging dynamics of business, from bidding practices to leadership styles. I'm really excited to be joined by two wonderful guests today. Rebecca Link is a proposal veteran and AI explorer who has committed over a decade to industry growth and improvement. She has held a variety of titles within the industry and proudly supports AI startups and GovCon powerhouse Steampunk as a solution strategist. She is APMP certified and holds a master's in public administration. In her spare time, she can be found in the garden or with a nose in the book. Thanks for joining today, Rebecca.
Thanks so much for having me.
Also with us today is Dale Tuttle, former CTO, COO, and partner in a large public accounting firm. He's focused on improving business operations. Dale enjoys working with small and medium-sized businesses and nonprofit organizations, helping them understand and adapt new technologies and build effective and resilient organizations. Dale helps business leaders understand rapidly changing technologies, effectively engage staff, build better performing businesses, and improve business resiliency in the face of rapid technological and social change. Happy to have you here as well, Dale.
Thanks.
So let's get into the conversation. And I think, AI is always a hot topic. It's always something that is going to be a subject. And I know it's a passion project for the VisibleThread team as well. But for us, we're going to start a little bit on that AI conversation, but then we're going to expand it into the broader generational differences of management styles and also, how the world and the workplace has changed in this post-COVID era. So let's talk real quick. Before AI, what was the most significant change you'd seen in the industry during your career? And how do you think that has changed the current landscape? I'll give you an example. For me, it was SharePoint 2010. Getting out of email version control nightmares and into the it's checked out by so-and-so nightmares didn't really advance the productivity so much, but it did put that electronic aspect into how we were doing document management for proposal production. But it gave us the first glimpses into collaborative and not serial document development. Teaching those old dogs this new trick was a great advancement. And I know at least two people who decided at that point it was time to retire. So what have you guys experienced in your careers? What's been, for you, the most significant change? Dale, you want to go first?
Yeah. So for me, I think it really was just the move to the cloud. I think we used to call it digital transformation. I think we still do. I kind of prefer that term. But yeah, I mean, when things started shifting to the cloud around 10 years ago, I've been an IT consultant my whole career. I actually used to be a professor, believe it or not. Somehow I got into IT. But then around 10 years ago when, Office 365 and that other tools came out, I was like, oh, wait a minute, this is going to change everything. And it really has. But I'll echo something that you're talking about to just one more thing. This is a specific feature that technology has enabled in the last few years. It's the simultaneous editing of a document at the same time from a team perspective. That blew my mind. Still does. That more people don't use it. I guess Google really started it, right? I mean, it was just you're sitting there typing and someone else is typing, and at first it took it was kind of a change management issue. You're like, oh my gosh, people are looking at what I'm typing. I'm going to get instant feedback. But now it's just so ingrained in how you work, right? Is that everybody's working on the same document at the same time, and it really does speed things up. But I think that's great. But yeah, the whole transition to the cloud and the improvements to the applications that came with that transformation, that's a huge deal. Still is.
Yeah, absolutely. Rebecca, how about from your perspective?
Uh, there's been a number of things, but I think the first thing that comes to my mind that always makes me smile is the number of hard copy submissions that I had to do once upon a time. And even just thinking about it, I can still smell like the Epson printer cranking out those fresh, hot pieces of paper. Um, when you have an issue with a page and then you have to reprint like an entire set, all the binders and the tabulation and all that stuff. I can't tell you the last time that I've done a hard copy deal. So that's the first thing that comes to my mind.
Yeah, back in my early days, I had a little stuffed animal Lorax from Dr. Seuss that sat on my shelf. And anytime I had to reprint something or, print 8 copies of a solicitation for the red team, I always kind of gave him a little pat on the head. Sorry, buddy. We're doing our best. But yeah, the cloud made that change a great deal, quite frankly. And, a lot of that interactivity between the document developers themselves became, a huge change in how folks operate. Obviously, AI coming into the market starts to change some of those things as well. But talking about that collaboration, that online collaboration that we've been able to put ourselves into, I think our proposal industry was a little bit ahead of the game when it came to being able to work remotely using tools such as SharePoint. And then obviously during the pandemic, being able to video communicate with each other and having these video teleconferencing capabilities just enhanced the understanding that these products could be developed remotely with the right people and the right training involved. So let's take that segue a little bit and talk a little bit about the pandemic, because it really did force that rapid transition into remote work. So as we emerge out of this post-pandemic era, fingers crossed, right? And when we break down the conversation into, looking at that hybrid future, some folks are back in the office full time. Some folks are fighting it tooth and nail. And a lot of folks have found their way in either a hybrid or a fully remote work location. Talking specifically about those technological advances, changes in virtual communication and reshaping the job roles. What is it that you can think of from that time frame of the pandemic that, really changed how we operate, how we do business, specifically for, government contracting in the proposal industry? Dale, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I guess what taking it thinking back through how digital transformation really kind of set us up for the pandemic to get through it from a technical standpoint. So these transformations were underway. And so once the pandemic hit, we were able to transition over to remote work, right? It really was not that big of a deal. Where the big deal becomes is from a business operations standpoint, probably from a macro standpoint. That is, now businesses have come to realize that people don't want to be in the office all the time. We actually can do remote work effectively. And that has all these cascading business decisions that are now coming to the fore. How big should my office be? Where should it be located? And so these kind of business implications from remote work really is really it's still happening. From a commercial real estate perspective, it's still happening. Businesses are figuring out as their leases come due, how do I right size the business for a remote workforce? and where should it be since we're going to have a smaller footprint. These are big deals for giant businesses and even small businesses. And but I will say, backing up for a second, inadvertently, we were ready for the pandemic because of the move to the cloud, right? Because these productivity tools, Office 365, Google Workspace, all that stuff was happening. And so when the pandemic hit, we were ready. And we transitioned fairly smoothly over, Zoom. I have to mention Zoom, of course. Well, I think we transitioned over pretty easily. And now that transition, so we're trying to figure it out from a business operational standpoint.
Rebecca, from your experience in the past few years through the pandemic and the change from the remote, from the on-site to the hybrid, I've been a hybrid work from home employee for, the last almost 15 years. So when the pandemic started and everybody was sad about not being in the office, I really didn't think I was missing anything. But, there was a huge change and a huge understanding of what it means to work collaboratively from that remote environment. What was your experience like?
Yeah, I mean, we've had the luxury of being able to do our jobs from anywhere, being in the growth and proposal industry. There is value in FaceTime, but I think any employer at this day and age that's forcing people to come back to the office needs to like do some kind of healing from whatever past trauma they're carrying around with being burned by personnel and staff not pulling their weight, right? I think it's a combination of hiring the right people that you trust and that produce, and understanding that it is now, I think that is one good thing that came from the pandemic is that it statistically proved that we are just as productive and maybe even happier being a more remote workforce. It frees up time for your employees to, instead of commuting, maybe now they're taking a training course or, doing something to further their education and professional growth with that additional time. Or heaven forbid, just going for a walk outside to decompress after a stressful, proposal or meeting or something like that. So I think that those are advantages to an employer by allowing employees to have that flexibility. So yeah, we've kind of always lived a little bit of that life, but now instead of having to justify why I want to work from home on any given day during the week, it's just more commonplace and normal now.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, in my personal experience, um, you know, my former employer was really driving towards all leadership staff in office. And like I said, I had been remote since the day I was hired for that organization. And through my career there, over a decade, me being in the office was hardly a consideration. We were very successful. I ran my proposal shop remotely. Very few of my actual employees were located in office. And I'm out, in Maryland, just outside the big Beltway circle there, and it takes 90 minutes to get into the city, into DC. And one thing that I did notice that was so strange is pre-pandemic, Crystal City, Virginia, where our headquarters office was, lunch shop after lunch shop after lunch shop. You could get any kind of food you wanted within a 5 to 10 minute walk. You go to Crystal City now, it's a ghost town. Through the pandemic, all those small shops closed up. And then it made it undesirable to even be in the office because you couldn't get lunch without having to DoorDash, and spend the extra money for that. That's not a perk, in my opinion. But, and again, when I was in the office, I wasn't getting anything done because I was socializing and catching up with folks, which the FaceTime is incredible. It's fantastic. But there's an impact to productivity too, an inverse impact to productivity in some office environments. So let's talk about that for a little bit. Like how do we find that we are more productive out of office than in office? And where do we think some of those lost FaceTime experiences can be made up? Virtual happy hours were a thing during COVID. I don't know that we're doing those very much anymore. But, what is it that office workers and workers in general in and out of office are doing to stay connected to one another, feeling that they have that collaborative environment with their coworkers?
What we were doing was trying to do corporate events again. right? So instead of, being there 3 days a week or 2 days a week, which actually is, I actually do like that if you can somehow get a few people into the office every week, if you can, for the people that can do that. Uh, you know, you do more things out of the office. We did, instead of one event a year, we were doing 4 events a year. Now that can get expensive, um, especially for a smaller firm. But that's what we were doing, just trying to get people out and meet somewhere, not necessarily in the office, because meeting in the office was highly unsuccessful, and it still is. I keep in touch with some former colleagues, and actually recently found out this is a large public accounting firm with a large office in Bethesda. They're closing it next October when the lease is up, and because they can't get enough people to fill the space, and so they're doing a couple things. They're making it smaller. They're moving it to Northern Virginia, which is a whole other discussion, perhaps. But again, from business operations, this is what firms are facing, right? What do we do with our leases, and how big that space should be, and where should it be? Is more important than ever. But to your point, they are doing many more corporate events, just because that's really the only time they get people together.
Yeah, absolutely. Rebecca, your current employer, are you mostly virtual? I know you're working virtual, but do you have that hybrid experience?
Yeah, so I work for a remarkable company called Steampunk. They're just a powerhouse. And so, kind of just playing devil's advocate to what Dale was just saying, we do so many events. It's like when I joined them, I was a little overwhelmed because like their culture and their community it's impressive. And you hear every company you go to, they're like, here are 5 pillars for our corporate, culture and whatever. But rarely ever do you see that actually embodied by the employees or by leadership. These people, I mean, it's like a cult. It really, it's really everybody's drinking the hot pink Kool-Aid over at Steampunk. But rightfully so. They really embody and live their core values. And so, and we are a geographically dispersed company, do have obviously like a lot of Beltway bandits, a large concentration of people here in the Northern Virginia, DC area. And so they do a lot of in-person events. During the summer, they do grill and chills. You bring your family. Like I bring my kids, we go party. It's super fun. There's a fishing trip next month. End of the year party is like a concert. They hire I think this year I don't know if I'm allowed to say. Well, I shouldn't say. It's like a band, like a really neat band, but they're real. And like people from out of town will come for that, right? I mean, people want to come because there's this culture, but we use a number of different tools aside from partying all the time. We have a number of different tools that we use for collaboration and for connection. We use Slack, not my favorite because Slack channels get out of control and we are no excuse. We are no exception. We have like a million Slack channels, but they're active. They're vibrant. We have a book lovers channel. We have one that we call random, and everybody yesterday was like posting back to school pictures and these are people that I don't know, but like everyone's sending the hearts and the emojis, and it's just this supportive culture. And then we have a platform called Lattice, which allows you to leave public praise for people across the company for a variety of things, whether they're excelling on a program or they supported a really key endeavor. We also use another platform called Mural, which essentially is a kind of like a virtual whiteboard in a way. And to populate the whiteboard, you have sticky notes and icons. And we do these really neat collaborative exercises where, we'll give everybody a task and we'll set a timer for 5 minutes and people are dropping, their stickies and it's really cool. But it facilitates all of that, facilitates this community of transparency, communication, collaboration, thriving, feeling uncomfortable. And it's just this quirky, kind of cool group of people. So I think that they're really excelling in a lot of areas. So instead of closing their doors, Dale, like some of these companies are, they keep them wide open. And I think by doing that, it's sparing them from maybe some of the fallout that we've had from the pandemic. I mean, their story, they have a studio in Tyson's where they will host, the government and people and whatever. And they opened it at the end of 2019. Worst timing ever. But they've managed to like ride that wave and still be successful by staying true to their core values and really, and it's all about people at the core and giving back to their employees. So I think they're doing it right.
I love hearing that because, oh my gosh, I was just kind of flashing back to the company picnic or,
Yeah.
we used to, way back in the day, we would do a grill out in the parking lot of the office building, on a weekday. And it was, if you're not billable on contract, come on out and have a hot dog. If you are, take your lunch
You're
break.
not invited
come on
if
out
you're
and have a hot
billable.
dog.
Yeah.
But yeah, you don't get a lot of that anymore. The out of office camaraderie that a lot of companies have, those summer picnics and those sorts of things. Our disbursement of our workforce does make that difficult, even down to the holiday party of, this office, that office, if you're spread across the country in different environments, but still getting that one-on-one human interaction. So I'm going to segue that over to the conversation of the war room, because I feel like it's a missed environment. I feel like it was a mislabeled environment, though sometimes a little too apropos. But, that ability to collaborate on an opportunity towards solution development, bringing everybody together, all your teammates sitting around a room and having that conversation. And I want to segue into this because obviously, my business outside of providing this service to VisibleThread is, proposal development and business best practice consultancy. And working with a client the other day, they literally said, we don't do that team strategizing anymore. And, the reason was they don't have time. And the real reason is because you cannot get everyone's attention span to settle down long enough to have that conversation. I fully believe that in being as reactive and responsive as we've trained ourselves to be coming out of the pandemic, I think we forgot that sometimes we just do need to sit down and put brains together. So what are some ways that we can work around and work that back into our ability to do true solution development inside the proposal industry? How do we get out of the multitasking? I'm going to turn my camera off so you can't tell that I'm not paying attention. What are some strategies that companies can use to bring that collaborative, attention dedicated, we're here for this purpose, this cause, this particular opportunity? What are some strategies that we can use for remote and hybrid individuals?
Well, I guess I'll take that first. That's a really good question because, it's just this tension between not all your folks can be there, right? We're certainly more dispersed than we've ever been, right? A lot of people moved during the pandemic. Pardon me. But let's say you're all in a city area. If you, I agree with you, Marsha. I actually do miss, especially if we're working on a project, let's get a bunch of people in a room for a few hours to hash a few things out. Maybe it's to do the graphic component. And I still personally, if you're doing something, you have some whiteboards or something and you draw, and this is what we want this to look like. And someone is going, no, you want to do it that way. I know you can do that online. I know. But it just seems quite effective when you're all together. But now let me backtrack a little bit. One of the best ways to do that, I think, if you have to include people that are not going to be around, is if you can help them with more real estate. And what I mean by that is screen real estate. When you are collaborating with people online, it helps to have a big screen and multiple screens. So having some sort of standard, if for people, from a technological standpoint, this is how we do it. And if you can give them those tools, it's going to make them easier to do it. So for instance, if you're trying to collaborate solely on a laptop without two or three other screens or one giant screen, it's hard. So just that guidance to your remote people and providing the tools for them to be more effective as a remote worker, that's really important. But from a policy standpoint, or just at least from a culture standpoint, on really important things, getting people together, I think it still means something.
Yeah, it truly does. Rebecca, your thoughts?
Yeah, I actually disagree. I think you can give people all the tools in the world and lock them in a room, and that does not equal a good output. I think it's all about where you set the bar and um, not allowing or laziness begets laziness, right? And
Oh,
wherever you set
well,
that bar is where you're going to end up performing. And the initial part of this question was kind of, to me, it was sounding like about that left of proposal work and really making sure that you have the right teammates, the right solution and approaches. You have a relationship with your customer, like doing that legwork, and allowing that to not happen is a choice. And if you choose that, then don't scratch your head and be confused why you're losing and you're not winning these deals. So, but if you're allowing it to happen and your bid, no bid, or go no go process is broken, and you don't have the ability or willingness to say no to a what we call a stinker, then so like to me, it's a little bit more about what you allow, where you kind of set that threshold of acceptability with your business processes and growth. I mean, I know for us, we are maniacal about customer relationships, and we will not bid on something if we have not met with a customer or have fostered some sort of relationship and have a true and deep understanding of what the needs are and how we could reasonably meet them from a staffing, technical, pricing, whatever standpoint. So yeah, I mean, there's no room, there's no war room that is going to solve that. It's really everybody being sharing that mindset and operating at the same level. To the war room piece, though, I am still, so I'm old fashioned in the sense where like I always print a hard copy. I'm like a highlighter and red pen person. So I still like to do that. And that reminded me of like the wall walks. Remember those? We would like print things out, especially for orals, right? You print out all your slides and do like a wall walk. And I don't know, how now in hindsight, because that was like a thing, right? Like that was like a best practice. And now that we're all kind of virtual, maybe we do like a virtual wall walk, we do our page turn or whatever you want to call it. But how valuable was that activity? Like maybe we like caught something or, but are we still operating at the same level just as well virtually? Do we need to print out that hard copy and lock ourselves in a room to get the same outcomes? No, I don't have the answer. That's like a
Well,
hypothetical
it also
question,
depends
but
on the personalities of the people, right? I mean, the people that are more social will somehow find a way to get together. What I think you do is you at least provide a opportunity for the people that want to get together to be together. But really, what it comes down to is being able to fuse a remote, a hybrid environment, I should say, um, environment to quickly get things done and effectively get things done. But people work differently; their personalities are different. And I think that's what's really interesting now is there are different ways to participate and collaborate. And you really need to allow all those ways to happen instead of imposing one thing on everybody. Um, the culture of the organization depends on it too, right? If you're in a in a operation that we like to be in person. I guess Marcia, you were talking about that. You did have that culture where they actually were trying to impose that on you instead of being more flexible.
yeah.
Yeah, I
And
don't think that works anymore.
let's segue that over to the generational discussion. And I have a bit of statistic here because it ain't going to be me taking on those jobs, Rebecca. I have been learning to change from analog to digital to cloud to I'm not
you're
doing it
done.
anymore.
Yeah.
So solid Gen Xer right here. But I do find it fascinating, right? And I joke and I tease all the time. My major in college was mass communications before the internet. Facebook wasn't a thing, and I'm looking at, my first career was in cable television commercials and video production, and now a third grader can do what I went to school for on their phone in a matter of minutes. And now, ironically, we're being asked to do video proposal submissions, and I was like, oh wait, I actually do know how to do that, but I'm not going to. And that's the whole thing, right? So as we had this changeover in generations coming through the workforce life cycle, And to tell you this, from 2024 to 27, the U.S. is expected to have more than 4.1 million Americans turn 65 each year, therefore hitting retirement age. So that 1,100 people a day are retiring out of the workforce, in theory. That's the largest surge in history. That's the boomers, right? So by the end of 2024, it's also expected that there will be more Gen Z in the workforce. Those are the kids born in this millennia. It's like not in the 1900s. So as we bring these folks into the workforce, Gen Z is going to make up 30% of the workforce in the next 6 years. But the approximate age right now of your middle management is 48, solid Gen Xer. So when you look at kind of those changes in not just workplace culture, but also how technology comes into that workplace culture, you've got literal opposite ends of the spectrum, more so than I think we can ever say in our modern history. We all know, our grandparents and our parents are of those retirement ages, and they went through what their generations went through. But over the last 40 or so years, that takes you back into the 1980s, those are 2 centuries that we're crossing over, let alone the generations, and we were supposed to have flying cars by now. Let's start talking about that.
Yeah,
But,
what's up with that?
as a Gen Xer, it seems to me that there's just a mind shift in how leadership is going to change over the next few years, and how the younger generations coming in, they understand things differently. They literally communicate differently, which is not by their mouths, it's by their thumbs. So sarcasm falls out of the conversation very quickly. But understanding kind of what those generational changes are in the workforce. What are some of the things that we have experienced ourselves at representing our generations? And then what do we kind of see coming in with the newer generations? Dale, you want to
Yeah,
take
well,
that one first? Because Rebecca looks like she's ready to talk, but I'm going to make her wait.
well, if I hear my son say like and subscribe one more time, I'm gonna lose my mind. So
You, you know, I try not to be a crotchety old man. I really don't think that I am. Um, I do notice some interesting things. I have kids like most people do. Mine are in their early 20s and mid 20s. And, one of the things that I have not personally adapted to well is doing everything on my phone. I mean, I use my phone all day, but for the complex activities my kids do on their phone, like if I'm looking for airline tickets, I can't do it on my phone. I can't. I need to see a bunch of options. I need to see things, right? So I need more real estate. So I'm always amazed at the complex activities the new younger kids are able to do on their phones. It's because the expectation is I will just use my phone to do something. Now I went through the whole mobile shift. We did my business is a lot of mobile app development, all that sort of stuff. But my mind never shifted to doing more work actually on my phone. Um, so that's interesting because AI will enable you to do more things. You can just you can just talk to the app and it will do something for you, right? So I see that being easier to do in the future. So that ease of use of a small amount of real estate is definitely something I'm seeing in younger people. And actually, the firm I retired from, the accounting firm, they the young accountants were much more comfortable doing that as well. So you do see a shift. That's a big shift, right? I think. Of course, laptops are the next level up, and everybody uses a laptop, which is I have no problem doing that. Expectations are of course different too, but that feeds into our earlier conversation where younger people don't want to be in the office all the time, and they're not good on. And so I do. There is definitely, at least on paper, a looming labor shortage. So we'll see how that actually transpires. But AI could make up a lot of that slack in the workforce. So I don't know. I do think it's expectational. That's not even a word. Expectations are different for younger people on how to interact with technology, right? how they do their work. That's really me. It's really interesting to me from a social standpoint, right? How people actually end up doing stuff because a massive maneuver, people will do what they want to do. Like, well, people tried businesses tried to force everybody back into the office. Really, I would say its generalization has not worked well. Um, so it's because people say, "Look, we're not doing that," and I think we're falling in this hybrid thing, right? And that hybrid's kind of working. But the expectational changes. Is that really? We should check that out. Is that a word? If it's not, it ought to be. Um,
It is now.
thank
Going
you. So yeah, the younger people just have different expectations than people in my generation. And I have to admit, I think I'm the last boomer. I think so, but I don't have any problem using new stuff. I don't know. I've always been like
Well,
that.
you're a technologist.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's never been better from a technology standpoint. The stuff that you can do, it's never been better. How could you
Yeah.
complain about it, right? My gosh,
Tomorrow will be even better than today.
it'll be better. Honestly, I agree. Totally agree with that.
Yeah. I think we're long overdue for a culture shift, and I'm here for it. I'm ready. Like I've been in GovCon pretty much my entire career, and a lot of ex-military boomer kind of environment. So I'm excited to see what the next generation will bring. Um, you know, Thinking about this from the gap that you kind of stated, it's interesting because these younger folks have come with being able to do things on their phone screen, right? But also the apps and like the software and the platforms, the quality of these is much better than when we started. I mean, remember our QWERTY keyboards and our flip phones and stuff? We thought that was amazing. And so it's not a stretch to understand that like being able to do something from the face of an iPhone is normal or easy, based on the quality and accessibility that we have now. But I think that regardless of age, I think it is our responsibility, obviously depending on what field you're in, to stay at least in pace with, if not, on par and ahead of the tools and tech that are available to us. And I think in our industry, I have actually literally been attacked on LinkedIn on some of my posts because I'm always a cheerleader and champion for AI. And I've had people in my industry say, how can you be preaching this? Because it's going to take our jobs. It's going to replace us. And I think that the truth in that statement, because there's truth in that statement, is if you do not figure out how to use these tools and do some further, education and training, to understand how to leverage them and augment them and how your organization plans to do the same, that's when you're jeopardizing your job security there, because you're not going to make AI go away. So you have a choice. I have degrees and certifications, but by far the best core class I've ever taken, it was in community college, and it was Introduction to Microsoft Office. And it was Word, Excel, PowerPoint. And back in the day, they made you do Access. No one uses Access. I don't even know if it's still around. But hands down, best class I've ever taken because I use those applications and they've stood the test of time. I use them daily. The second best class that I've ever taken is Introduction to Prompt Engineering. When we're talking, do you want to talk about that time gap or that age or generation gap? That is that in real life, because I guess I fall into a micro generation, we call it called a zennial, right? Or I'm not a millennial and I'm not a Gen Xer, so I'm a zennial.
generational purgatory.
Yes, I'm in 1983. We're apparently a weird little group, but whatever. I'll own that. But that's actually a really good representation because in my early, fresh out of high school years, I took this Microsoft Office course. And now here at, 40 years old last year, I took this prompt engineering course. You want to talk about night and day technology, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's our personal responsibility to continue to learn, have a learner's mindset, whether that be tools and tech or from a relationship and kind of humanistic approach, right? Where we have an outgoing generation and an incoming generation into the workforce, and being empathetic and cognizant and aware of what everybody uniquely brings to the table. Did
Along those lines, I was thinking about something recently is that so now a lot of people, especially younger people, everything they write, the Gen AI will write the first draft or maybe the whole thing. And I think I mentioned earlier, I used to be a professor. And I think about this all the time. Like, my gosh, remember essay writing? Well, now you can obviously do it on your computer, but now that they're not doing that, a machine is writing it. So now they're trying to figure out did the student write this or not? And now there's AI to help the professors figure out if AI wrote it or not. And it's only, you know, kind of hard, honestly. But so again, it gets back to how people are interacting with technology and using it and what are they using it for. Writing is really the biggest thing people are using Gen AI. And from a proposal standpoint, pretty much everyone will be creating their first drafts with some sort of Gen AI tool before too long that might impose a certain sort of sameness on the responses because they do all kind of work the same way. Um, but also what I was thinking about a proposal standpoint is, I guess Rebecca, you brought this up earlier. If, I think it's going to put more emphasis on how you do things, right? How are we interacting with the client? What are our win things? My gosh, people don't even talk about that anymore. It seems to me like, how are we different than the 500 other people bidding on this thing? How do we, how do we actually communicate those win things in a structured way across the document? This is not AI helps with that, but these are people making decisions about how to present information to another person, right? Visually. Um, the science of information about how people cognitively receive information, that hasn't changed. I used to have changed because the expectations are different. But you know what I mean? There's some fundamental things that haven't changed. But AI will possibly impose some sameness on responses. So maybe there's some opportunity there for people to realize if you put more into your human capital in your interactions, that might be the way of differentiating yourself now. But I don't know. I mean, it seems like we can't forget that people are still important, and the most successful people will be the people using AI and using advanced tools in their place, right? Not letting them take over.
Yeah, and I go back to the attention span, and I think that's another thing that we're seeing inside of this industry. I know, I started in proposals in 2006, 7, 8, and our volumes were 50 pages, 100 pages, 75 pages, 10 past performance references. So you see the quantity of information has scaled down, which means the specificity has to be there, the details and those win themes, absolutely. I think some of that is going to take us back to the fundamentals of what, true proposal management, solution development, speaking to the customer means inside of organizations. And kind of the one way that I feel that is I look at, now again, I started out, in mass communications, advertising, public affairs, those sorts of things. It's always been about language, right? How we communicate with each other and understanding that you've got different generations in your audience and how do you address them? How do you address different reading styles, different learning styles, different, all the things that make us human, where AI takes all that down into common denominators. And so we need to take that back out into the differences. Why do we stand out as an organization? What do we do? What is our culture like? Those are going to be important things to discriminate the company against, the other submitters who are pushing, a more generalized response back to their proposals. So I want to take that kind of looking again at that attention span. Proposals are now turned around in 2 weeks. They're 10 pages, 5 pages, a 3-page tech prop. How do you explain what you're going to do for a $10 million project in 3 pages? Those are very difficult things to communicate. And having the younger generations coming in, they've got that 8-second attention span. They're watching the TikToks and the Vines, and I know I'm saying it like an old person. But I find it very difficult to boil things down as much as they need to be to get them through. But I think Dale's right on, and Rebecca, I think you said it too, on the opposite side, the government is also going to be using tools to evaluate our proposals. So the differentiation really does come from what influence the humans have. And I got a little bit off topic there, but really looking at, shortening. AI is going to help that tremendously. But let's talk about some of those fundamental strategies. We've touched on them, the win themes, if we had a war room, what would we do in it? Can we tie that together from a generational and a technology perspective? Because I'm in the middle. I don't mind reading a 20-page document so long as it says something worth reading. But if I can say that in a 3-page document, I'm all for it. Where's the balance there?
Yeah. On the tech side for AI, it's called fine tuning, right? Fine tune a model. You have a foundational model that you start with, and then you kind of teach and train it and feed it information and more robust prompts and things for it to take into consideration when generating and crafting your output. We can do the same thing with people, right? We can streamline our approaches and our processes, so one of the trainings and talks that I've done before is called Death to the Debrief, because if I have to sit in one more meaningless proposal debrief call where we pass the microphone around and everybody says the same thing, I'm going to echo what Jen said, and I think we need to update this language here. Like that's not an effective or efficient use of time, right? So how do we figure out from a tool and technology standpoint and a human standpoint, how to make the most of our interactions, whether it be on a platform or whether it be, human face to face? I don't have all the answers. That's a different podcast for a different day. But I think it starts with really analyzing your process, analyzing the activities. I was joking with a couple coworkers yesterday where we had kind of like a deal review and whatever. And somebody was like, that was a really expensive meeting. Meeting the people in attendance for that 30 minutes, their salaries, that was an expensive meeting. You're taking time out of people's days, and and the person who ran the meeting did a great job. They came to the meeting with a ton of stuff already populated. So it was more of a sounding board where it wasn't like, hey, let's fill out this blank piece of paper together, right? So I think we have to become more strategic with how we're utilizing time. That's a thing that I think young people are really good at. They have already thought about how they plan or want to spend their time. And it's not the same way as, we're used to meet death by meetings and sitting in, hours long calls and whatever. They're not going to do that. They're going to be like, how do we speed this up? How do we do this more efficiently and effectively? And then that's where kind of tools and tech will come in to help along with that process.
And that will change to as procurement people become younger, right? That's where, I think, at least I do. I always think about this, how do we work with procurement? We always think of them as being staid and conservative, which they are, right? I mean, the government is coming at you usually a little bit behind everybody else in terms of tools, processes, all that sort of stuff. But what's happening is that the procurement officials are getting younger. So their expectations about how to interact with the vendors change. So there will be some sort of leveling out, I think, over time when the vendors, people on the outside responding to procurements, people creating the procurements will kind of become similar, right? So I think that actually could be a big change. That'll probably drive how they want the vendors to provide information to them, how they do it, how long things are, that sort of stuff. So that'll be interesting to see, because they tend to be older, right? Procurement people in the government in particular, but that I'll have to change. I mean, sooner or later. So that'll be a kind of interesting thing. So there'll be this kind of arms race between the vendors and the, you know, uh, and the procurement officials about who's leading whom, I guess, and what the expectations are for the proposal comes out.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is a topic for another podcast. We'll be having that conversation between uh, proposal industry representatives and government representatives and what's changing on each of our sides. I think that's a huge aspect of it too, Dale, is the awareness of the other, right? It's not just what we're doing inside of our own business, how our own business individually, the culture exists, the leadership changeovers, the, new C-suite coming in, all of those things. We have to remember those are happening in every organization. And one of the things I love about being a consultant is seeing those things in different organizations. I have the luxury of watching one company do something one way and another company doing something a different way. I also see a lot of companies doing all the wrong things all the same way. And it's one of those things, it's like you've learned it from the person who came before you. Um, early in my career, again, in the early 2000s, it was a pet peeve of mine to always hear this is the way we've always done it. And at that point, I was a young person coming into this industry. And, my mother had worked in proposals, come to find out when I was a child. No wonder she was so stressed all the time. And, as she would explain it, it was, oh, you'd wait for the catalog to come and then you'd find which RFP you wanted to bid on. And then you'd have to wait for the solicitation to be mailed to you. And then you'd type it in your typewriter and you'd use your whiteout. I'm like, thank God we're not doing it the way we've always done it, right? I mean, that is miserable. But to have that mindset of I can't adapt because I've already adopted, right? I've already come this far. I don't want to go any further. We can't have that mindset. I don't think very many do anymore. But the opposite side of that question is how fast do we actually have to change? And I think where I personally sit right now is not this fast. I think, if we could push pause on innovation long enough for us to kind of settle into what's going to stick, but that's not going to happen. That's not our culture. That's not our environment. The pace and speed of being able to do what we need to do in order to get these proposals out of the door, 24 hours to prepare for an orals conversation. Is that an easier response than 4 days to write a technical approach? It's not. It's the same. You still have to go through all of those same thought processes and activities. What steps can you skip? Very few. So where the adaptation in this evolution of not just changes in generations, but changes in technologies, where do you guys see us kind of hopefully settling into a groove? Do you see us settling into a groove? Or do you feel like with this AI innovation and the constants of technology innovation, are we always going to feel reactive, or is there a way that we can get stable and then proactive? That's a lofty question.
Yeah. Well, I think, Dale, you mentioned cloud, and that's always stuck in my mind because we went through a pretty big transition during the, rise of the cloud, and everybody was joking like, oh, cloud. But then people stopped joking. They're like, wait, where is my data going? And the government was like, hold on, you can't put our stuff over there. You have to co-locate it and run it on dark fiber. Like, let's all slow down, right? But now today, cloud is the household name. My 74-year-old mother is like, oh, my photos are in the cloud. And so I think that we're going to see that with AI too, right? The buzz and the hype and everything is going to fizzle. It's going to become more of a household name. It's going to be implemented and leveraged where it makes sense and where organizations have adopted and implemented it into their business practices. Hopefully one day when they get there. But that's where we are right now. We're in that adoption. When this first came into our space, Marsha, like 2 years ago, right, with all these, little tech startups that are like, oh, we'll get you to a pink draft. I was like, whoa, hard stop. What does this mean for my job? What does this mean for my industry? And I didn't like it. And the hate that I felt for it was more fear, right? It was fear-based and it was fear of change. It was fear of the unknown. And we still have a little bit of that lingering. We have not everybody is, waving the pom-poms for AI yet, but we're going to get there. And unfortunately, people don't really have a choice again, because it's here and it's not going anywhere. But I think it'll slow down a little bit. So maybe that will be helpful for you, because you're like, I don't need all this innovation that fast. I think it's still going to be a wildly innovative field, because the possibilities and capabilities of it are just, I mean, they seem limitless right now. And I kind of refer affectionately to where we are as like the Wild West at the moment. But that's not going to be forever. And I think change is hard and transition is hard for everyone. But again, I think it's great, like with the younger workforce coming in. My son and I are doing Chat GPT for Kids class together right now. And it's very cool. My kid is not going to blink an eye at the distinction between AI versus human generated content. He's going to be an AI native. This is going to be normal for them. So I think we're gonna level out. Dale, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it'll level out. There's some macro trends that are interesting. Probably because I read too much about it. But right now we're also in the FOMO period where all the vendors. I mean, there's such an arms race in the development of AI tools, but they're all so similar. You know,
They're all the same.
ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, Llama, Sissy, Betty, Mistral, right? So everyone
Eh,
is just trying to develop this capability, not really knowing where the end state is, or even if I guess the end neighborhood is. They're just all trying to develop the same thing to see who wins,
yeah.
and that's why referring back to that study from Microsoft, I really thought was great, just because people aren't sure where to leverage these tools to be the most productive, right? So that's kind of happening, and I do think it will slow down a little bit. But most of us, frankly, are consumers of AI. We're not developing AI tools. We are receiving the flood of capabilities that are being released to us. And I hope it slows down. I don't think it's going too soon. I met with a startup last Friday. They're developing a AI tool for professional services. Like if you're developing a statement of work or you want to know how to bid on something. What did I bid on last time? So it's trying to make the AI aware of your actual work product. Okay. Unfortunately, as they acknowledged to me, there's about 75 of these in Washington, D.C. area coming up right now. And so how do you rise to the top? This is it's the Wild West, as Rebecca said. So I don't think it's going to slow down um, anytime soon, but it will only because there's only so much money
Yeah.
um, to develop these tools. The other, from a macro perspective, thing that I think will slow it down is there's some real downsides to what's happening right now. The electrical consumption of these tools is massive. There's all kinds of things about projections about electrical usage growth. It's almost all from Gen AI and data centers right now, and hopefully that slows down at some point because all the new electrical stuff that's coming on, a lot of the new electrical capacity that's being deployed to the grid to support data centers. And well, what if that slows down? Um, I mean, there's all types of huge implications, things about this. And then, I was reading an article in The Economist this morning. When you execute a search on Google, just regular Google, you execute a search on Gemini or ChatGPT or Claude, how expensive was that request? Well, guess what? It's an order of magnitude more expensive to put a request through to Gemini than it is to just the standard Google search. And these are the actual social costs of these tools being rolled out to all of us. And so you don't think about it in those terms because you're just on your computer. But what's happening? This request is being sent over, and now a whole bunch of churning is happening for that one request. Now they'll get more efficient over time, but there's a lot of social um, the social, political ramifications, environmental implications. So the rollout of these tools, and the more we use them, the more those impacts start to accumulate. I find that fascinating because we don't think about that. And I was like, my gosh, I read that this morning, by the way. I was like,
Yeah.
I never thought of it that way.
Yeah,
Right.
that's interesting because that's something that I've been just personally paying attention to is when I want an answer to something or I'm seeking information, what is the deciding factor between just jumping on Google and like searching for something versus using chat? Because I personally have attached my horse to ChatGPT. I like it. I'm most comfortable with it, whatever. So I use
True.
chat. But what is my deciding factor with what I'm trying to do or perform that takes me in one direction or another? And I
True.
literally have never stopped and thought about the financial or economical or environmental
Yeah.
considerations. And
This
now I
morning I did.
will every time. Thank you.
Well, what
Um,
I did, Rebecca, you know what's interesting is that I'm actually worse now because I turned on my Google, I turned on Colab Lab, the collabs. I set it to just use it uses Gemini all the time. So I'm always getting, if it can't always pull it off.
right.
You'll see when it's just using the traditional, if you can say that word, Google search. But if it can, it's going to use Gemini. So what I'm
Yeah.
doing is I'm always imposing a load, right? Electrical load and cost to the world, if you will, on every search I do, or at least I'm trying to.
Yeah.
Google
But
decide doesn't.
nobody even thinks about it. And that's a really
You
good
don't.
point is that we're all just using these things because
Yeah,
they're available to us. It's kind of horrifying when you stop and think about it.
that's it. I'm turning everything off. That's it.
Yeah, the equivalent would be if we all just walked around up and down the street and just threw trash. We were just like throwing our trash on the street and like no one even thought about it. Like at some point that would become disastrous. Yes. So that's kind of funny from a technology standpoint. We never stop and think about what that little search or that hitting the enter button is actually
What's it doing?
costing from a lot of different angles.
Yeah. Yeah. I spoke to somebody a while ago who was in tech and their company was building their own internal AI. And one of her major concerns was water consumption to keep the server rooms cool. You don't realize. You don't realize. So that I think is an entirely different podcast and not one that we've thought of.
Not
But
one that
oh
would
my
fall under
goodness,
our umbrella. No, yeah.
I think although to me it brings it all together, right? Because we've talked about so many different things today. But what it really brings us back to is the humans and how the humans need to connect and interact with each other to do our jobs. Absolutely. To stay sane probably has a part of that, but to be good stewards of ourselves and our literal and physical and figurative environments in which we work together, where we work, and how we work. So I think we've covered the topics pretty much in detail today. What would you guys say would be kind of your closing remarks? What are you looking forward to? What do you wish we still had? Take a couple seconds and kind of put a bow on this conversation for me.
I guess.
Dale?
All right. Well, that's an interesting question. I do think it's really adaptability. Even you just have to be willing to adapt right now. Things are changing so quickly. It's not just a cliche. It's not just an old person shaking their fist at the world anymore. I mean, it's really happening. And so I think what's scary is how to stay relevant is different every 3 months. Um, that's the interesting thing. Now, as an IT consultant, um, here it used to be you had to keep track of macro level trends for your client. Like, okay, things are moving to the cloud. Here are the implications. We have time to figure it out. Now, AI is on us and it's changing all the time, and how it impacts your business, this business in particular. It's every 3 months. It's a little bit different, and maybe a lot of it different. So yeah, being able to adapt and understand as best you can. Maybe AI will help us figure it out. But yeah, it's never that quality, being able to adapt, has never been more important. And I do think pulling on that thread of adaptability, understanding the human element, how best to leverage human inputs and outputs is really important. We're the human in the loop. That understanding is really important. And unfortunately, it's changing very, very quickly. What that means changes very quickly now.
Yeah, absolutely. Rebecca?
Yeah. That's really interesting. That kind of gave me pause. I think I personally have felt a bit more anxious over the last few years because there is a bit of an air of uncertainty, and the speed at which things are happening and changing. And then that's kind of piled onto or piggybacked onto coming out of a pandemic, a global pandemic. And so we're in a really interesting place, as a society, as a workforce, as, I don't care what generation you are. I think we all have some shared trauma, frankly. But there is a bit of an air of kind of like, what does the future hold? And that can feel uncomfortable. It can also feel exciting. So I think for me, I am excited to see the direction that things move. I definitely agree staying relevant is important. But to boil that down for me, I don't know, staying relevant. I think interpersonal communication and connection. I'm a people person. I enjoy continued learning and meeting new people and forming new relationships and having a vibrant network and community that I can both, put things out to and also receive things from. And that definitely keeps me going. So I think that's probably you can't AI that. Right? I mean, I'm sure someone would figure out a way to do that. But the humanistic side of it, the empathetic pieces of it, and realizing that we're all in this together and we're all kind of feeling a little uncomfortable at the moment, and really capitalizing on that and leaning into each other, I think is wildly important.
Perfect. Absolutely. So taking some takeaways from today's conversation that I have thoroughly enjoyed. We went down some roads I wasn't expecting to go on, but it's been an absolutely fun ride. So some things that we've really touched on today is balancing that human connection and the technology, identifying those strategies to use technology, but maintaining those strong interpersonal relationships, as Rebecca just addressed. Developing that future-ready workforce, exploring strategies for upskilling and reskilling employees. We talked about that a lot today to maintain that evolving workforce, as Dale just addressed. And then being resilient in your business, understanding how to adapt to those rapid changes in industry and those market conditions. And to know that you've got somebody watching that, is very important as well. You're going to get run over super quickly if we're not paying attention to what's going outside of the figurative walls of your organization. So we know it. The pace of change in the workplace is relentless, but it also presents incredible opportunities for innovation and growth. By embracing those new technologies, fostering collaboration, and developing a future-focused workforce, we can shape this industry for the better. We know it. We've proven it today. So I really appreciate your time joining me today on the Optimize podcast, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you both very much.
Thank you, and thanks to VisibleThread.
Thanks to VisibleThread. Thanks, Marcia. Thank you, Rebecca.
And that wraps up this episode of the Optimize podcast. A big shout out to our amazing host, Marcia Watson, and our guests, Rebecca Link and Dale Tuttle. You can connect with Rebecca and Dale in the links in the description. Optimize is brought to you by VisibleThread, the RFP software for analyzing solicitations and contracts, and for creating and editing proposals. VisibleThread is used by 11 of the top 15 US government contractors. Using VT-Docs and VT-Writer can be game-changing for efficiency and compliance in your documents. For more information, visit VisibleThread.com. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, rate, and review us wherever you are listening. Stay tuned for more insightful discussions on the Optimize podcast.